Hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Crystal. I love horror movies, and if you're looking for a fun, spooky, Halloween 365 all year round vibe, then I'm your girl. So on this channel, I do deep dives, reviews, opinions, thoughts, ratings of whatever films, or shows that we're talking about. There are timestamps on the bottom, so feel free to skip around a little bit if you want. I'm not gonna be offended. And once you finish this episode, let me know how you think I did. Comment, share, like, subscribe, all the good stuff, you know, if you want to. So obviously you can tell from the title, we are going to be doing a deep dive into Black Mirror season 6. Now, I did ask you guys on my Instagram if you wanted me to do this, and thankfully the people who did vote said yes, because I had already written all my notes out, so thanks for that. Also, if you have not watched season 6 of Black Mirror, there's gonna be a lot of spoilers in this video, so proceed with caution. So before we get into the deep dive of each of the episodes, I kind of wanted to talk about Black Mirror like as a whole for a little bit. So Black Mirror is an anthology television series created by Charlie Brooker. The series, of course, is inspired by The Twilight Zone.
Okay, I found this on the web for a series of courses inspired by The Twilight Zone. Check it out.
Siri, not right now. Anyway, the overall theme of Black Mirror is using technology and media to reflect on contemporary issues that we as humans can obviously relate to. And most of the episodes don't have happy endings. Not all of them, but most of them don't really have, you know, those cute little tie it on with a bow endings, which I'm not mad about. So Charlie Brooker was actually a comedic writer before he shifted into what we, of course, know now as Black Mirror. He works with executive producer Annabelle Jones, and they bat around these like what if ideas, and most of the time these ideas are repercussions of new technology. So when the series premiered on the British network Channel 4 in 2011, Brooker had this to say: "The Black Mirror of the title is the one you'll find on every wall, on every desk, in the palm of every hand. The cold, shiny screen of a TV, a monitor, a smartphone." And if you're a dedicated Black Mirror fan, you know that many of these episodes are connected to each other, and they have little Easter eggs in them. So with the first 5 seasons playing pretty heavily into sci-fi and these dystopian themes, Brooker said that he wanted to do something a little bit different for season 6. And even before season 6, we saw a lot of the other stories kind of shifts in the other seasons, like St. Juniper, and even the interactive 2018 film Bandersnatch. What I have always loved about Black Mirror is that it makes us like think about our lives and like how we do the things we do and why we do them and why we think we're supposed to be doing them. You know, is it because our parents, family, society tells us to do it that way and because like everybody else is doing it? Another thing that Black Mirror really touches on is the things that we find entertaining and why do we find them entertaining. Personally, my favorite episode is season 3, episode 1, Nosedive. Maybe because for a moment there, well, longer than a moment, I was like really obsessed with my social media presence for Horror Nights In, and now I'm kind of like backing away from that and trying not to care as much. So I think I connected with Nosedive really on like a deep level. Let me know in the comments what your favorite episode of Black Mirror is overall and why. Yes, you have homework. And at the end of this video, I'm gonna tell you what my favorite episode from Black Mirror season 6 is. So just stay until the end, guys. Cause you know, I put a lot of work into these videos and it just means a lot when you guys watch them all to the end and subscribe. Anyway, let me not try to go back into my Nosedive era. So while I was doing my research for this video, Brooker had this to say about season 6. "When we started doing the show, there weren't many dystopian sci-fi shows around. These days, you can't hurl a smartphone across the room without hitting 3 dystopian sci-fi shows. With season 6, there has been a conscious effort to rip up the rulebook, keep it unpredictable for viewers, and maybe expand its remnant." So with that being said, let's start with Joan is Awful. So in this episode, we follow an average woman who is stunned to discover a global streaming platform has launched a prestige TV drama adaptation in her life, in which she is portrayed by Hollywood A-lister Salma Hayek. I absolutely love the idea of like the whole like behind the scenes, especially of like a documentary or like of how a movie is made. I love when the fourth wall is broken and we like just get to see a bunch of other stuff. Now for Joan, She probably didn't like that. We also get the introduction of Streamberry, which of course is Black Mirror's play of Netflix. And this episode was nuts. We had like layers of celebrities like playing themselves while also playing characters within the episode. I really enjoyed this episode, and it was probably because it was like the first new episode we've gotten from Black Mirror since 2019. So I was just like really happy and excited. There were also moments throughout this episode of like comedy sprinkled in, and I guess I didn't realize how funny Salma Hayek is. Anybody else? Joan is Awful is an example of something that I mentioned like a minute or two ago in this video about the things that we find entertaining. We love, as a society, to watch documentaries about terrible people doing terrible things and meeting their terrible downfalls, as did Joan before she found out that what she was watching was about her. We also just never read the terms and conditions of anything, because as I mentioned before, we just do what everybody else does, and not reading the terms and condition is something that's normal. Right before this video, I opened up my Instagram app and it had updated its terms and conditions, and I was just like, sure. But I hate Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram though, if you want to. I think when Joan decided to take a shit in the church was when that I knew I was watching a Black Mirror episode, because it was so out there and it just fits so perfectly into the Black Mirror world. Another theme of this episode is AI, and if you are a user of TikTok, I'm also on TikTok. You can follow me on there too if you want. You know that for a little bit there, AI was taking over, but it was like a juxtaposition, because it was like humans acting as AI. TikTok is a very strange place. So going back to AI, Streamberry invented a fancy quantum computer that is able to transform a generative AI through experiment into TV programming, ruining lives along the way. And we saw our characters break into Streamberry headquarters and destroy this fancy quantum computer. And the episode ends with the real Joan being freed from this hamster wheel of Streamberry using her name and likeness. And it does have a happy ending. But what about AI? I feel like AI is like such a buzzword, and it's something that has been the focus of the tech industry for a while now, and it's growing so fast. We have like ChatGPT writing speeches, term papers, contracts, you name it. Companies are investing a ton of money into AI and machine learning. And even though Joan is Awful only took on like half the battle in like a comedic way, could this be our future? Am I a real person right now? Is everything I'm saying generated by ChatGPT? Am I just an AI? No, but seriously though, like, I'm real, and I wrote these words. But we hear people joke all the time about how computers are eventually going to replace all of us, like all of us at our jobs, and there's gonna be nothing left for us to do except for watch these computers do our jobs. And the scariest part about all of this is that AI and machine learning is being developed by humans. Like, the things that are replacing humans are being replaced by humans. And if that doesn't make you like scratch your head and think a little bit, I don't know what is. Moving on to the second episode of the season, Loch Henry. So we follow a young couple who travels to a sleepy Scottish town to start work on a nature documentary, but find themselves drawn to a juicy local story involving shocking events of the past. This episode ties into a little bit about what I was saying in Joan is Awful, because as I mentioned, audiences like to watch documentaries about horrible people, but also like horrific events that really happen, such as true crime. You cannot go on any streaming service without getting bombarded with documentaries and retellings of serial killers and murders from all over the world, and people eat these up. I like to stay in my lane of horror movies, but one can argue that a lot of our favorite horror movies first came into fruition because of real murders. So in Loch Henry, we follow Davis and his girlfriend Pia and Pia discovers the story of Ian Adair, a local serial killer, and she pushes Davis to cover that story instead of their original nature story. What we come to find out is that Davis's father was murdered by Ian Adair, so the story has a personal touch to it. The two then pitch the story and are urged to get more footage for it. So of course they visit the location of where these grisly murders happened, and the footage that they captured reminded me of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre with like, of course, a Scottish twist to it. So I really liked this episode because I like how Brooker kind of pulled back that curtain on how people like to spend their leisurely time by listening and watching true crime subject matter. It's definitely social commentary on how even like the general public takes these like horrific murders into their own hands, and they do like deep dives into the lives of these murdered people. We saw with the Gabby Petito case, and of course the Idaho college killings. And I don't want to say that the general public is wrong for doing any of this, but unfortunately it can spread a lot of misinformation. But that's a video for a different time, and not on this platform. Somebody else can do that. And no judgment on that if you do enjoy watching true crime, but we can see how filmmakers might be more into like finding a fresh take or like a new angle on people getting brutally murdered, which feels a little bit icky for me. But then once again, I watch horror movies, so juxtaposition, you know? The twist in this episode was a little bit predictable just because we saw a lot of Davis's mom, her involvement in the episode. Even though it wasn't a lot, it was still enough to be like, hey, remember her? Don't forget about Davis's mom. Hey, Davis's mom is over here in the corner. As Booker said, he wanted to rip up the rule book and do something different, and I think he did with this episode. One can argue that Loch Henry wasn't really technology dystopian based, but sorry if the audio is going to sound a little bit different now, guys. I forgot to put my, I don't know what this is called. I'm the worst at all of this. Anyways, we can argue, or at least I can argue, that technology was used in this episode because Davis's mom used a video camera and videotapes. It's still in essence technology, it's just older versions of it. So moving on to the third episode, Beyond the Sea. In an alternate 1969, two men on a perilous high-tech mission wrestle with consequences of an unimaginable tragedy. The theme of this episode can be summed up in one word: empathy. Fueled by the awesome cast of Aaron Paul and Josh Hartnett and Kate Marrow, this episode had me by the throat the entire time that I was watching it. This episode, as mentioned, is in 1969, where there is technology that allows two astronauts, David and Cliff, to go back to Earth to be with their families in the form of replicas. David, who is played by Josh Hartnett, has a beautiful wife and two children, and is almost at this like celebrity status on Earth. And we see this celebrity status when he and his family are going to the movies, and they are greeted by some young fans. Now, Aaron Paul's character, Cliff, on the other hand, decides to move his family to a desolate farmhouse pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And then one tragic night, a group of intruders break into David's home and brutally murder his wife and children in front of him, along with his replica. So after these horrific events, Cliff and his wife agree to allow David to inhibit Cliff's replica to have some semblance of a life outside of the murders, and obviously so that he can get off the spaceship for a little while. But of course, this ends badly due to the tension between Cliff, David, and Cliff's wife, with Cliff's wife, of course, being in the middle. Cliff is portrayed as this very standoffish, cold man and husband, whereas David is portrayed as having like a softer touch, who likes to paint and who likes to read. But because David, for lack of a better wording here, he is pretty fucked up, he slaughters Cliff's wife and son. And this episode ends with Cliff returning to the ship and David offering him a seat to sit down and talk. The one alarming question that I have, and a lot of people on the internet, is why not just send the replicas to space instead of the actual people? But then the other half of the internet schooled me on this and said that if something happened with the replicas in space, then there would be no way to fix the link. So that might have been a little bit of a hole in the writer's part, but once again, I'm like still kind of confused. So, and I also just don't think that it was like explained or emphasized on why David and Cliff were in space and like what they were actually doing. Obviously, they were like monitoring something in space. I don't know, I'm not an astronaut, okay? I also didn't quite understand why David felt like he needed to slaughter Cliff's entire family. But if we step into David's shoes, he was badly damaged, traumatized, and there was like no talk of David receiving any kind of support, like any kind of therapy. But I guess you could argue that in 1969 and like things were different back then, maybe David thought that eliminating Cliff's family would leave them both like damaged and stuck in space for like the remainder of their 6-year expedition. David also had like nothing left to lose, so it was only a matter of time until his mental state just exploded. And technically, well, I'm sure they could probably prove this, but technically Cliff's replica murdered the wife and kids, but at the same time, like, they each had their own like identifying key thing that they would use when they would go back down to Earth. So I'm sure that could be easily explained by technology, that David was the one who actually did the horrific crimes. There was also a lot of callbacks to what the world felt and looked like during the late 60s. The cult that broke into David's home was a mirror, of course, of Charles Manson and his followers. If you recall, Charles Manson and his family committed a series of at least 9 murders at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. There was also the moon landing by Apollo 11 in July of 1969. Also, not to get too far out there, but men in the late 60s might not have had like this space to tap into their emotions because it might have been like uncharacteristic, which is why we saw David break and ultimately like slaughter Cliff's family. I really liked this episode and how it was like visually portrayed and acted. I wish Josh Hartnett had had a little bit more screen time, so I'm hoping that Black Mirror uses him again for future episodes. Not that I am upset that Aaron Paul got a lot of screen time, because oh my god, he's such an amazing actor. I could never. Another thing that I want to note about Black Mirror, especially this episode with the idea of technology, is we're always going to find a way to abuse it, am I right? Moving on to the 4th episode, Mazey Day. A troubled starlet is dogged by invasive paparazzi while dealing with the consequences of a hit-and-run incident. Okay, so before we get into the meat of this episode, I have to admit, and I have before, that I love... I enjoy partaking in Twilight. The Twilight franchise book and movies every once in a while. So there are a lot of points within this episode that just giving me a lot of Twilight vibes. Charlie Brooker, I see what you did there. And this episode was not what I expected at all. I thought it was going to be more of like a Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2 episode, but it was from the perspective of like the greasy, nasty paparazzi. We follow Beau, who is a paparazzi in LA in the early 2000s, and she's starting to question her role in the downfall of like exposing celebrities. So while she is taking a hard look at her life, starlet Mazey Day is shooting a film in Europe, but she is struggling with substance abuse, and she decides to go driving, and while driving, she is under the influences, and she hits something or someone. And in response to that, she goes into hiding, which in turn makes getting a picture of her a very nice price tag. So Beau decides that this is going to be her last escapade, and she's going to find that picture of Mazey Day, make her money, and then get out of the game. She finds out that Mazey Day is hiding away at a rehab facility, and then her colleagues find it out too, so they all band together and break in and find out the truth. The truth was that Mazey Day was bitten by a werewolf. Maybe not a Black Mirror plot twist, but definitely a plot twist for sure. I didn't hate this episode as much as everybody else did. I liked it because it was like fast paced, it was well acted, it was definitely in your face, there was a lot of blood, there was a lot of gore. It also just sheds light on how horrible people can be to other people. We all know the horror stories of the invasive paparazzi and how even to this day, like paparazzi, they're still bad. I don't think they're as bad as they used to be, especially in the early 2000s. I'd like to believe things are better now, but then again, I mean, we all have cell phones, and these cell phones can take pictures and record things, so... And the general public just loves taking pictures with celebrities. Another interesting little thing that I found out while I was doing my research is the red mirror title sequence. We saw it in the Demon 1979, which we're going to talk about shortly. So what is red mirror? Well, Charlie Brooker explained that red mirror is a slight shift in focus. Where previous episodes have always been centered on tech, episodes with the red mirror title are ones that have no notable technology as its center point. And Mazey Day was almost given the red mirror title, but then Brooker decided not to do it. If you didn't like this episode, I would urge you to go back and rewatch it again, because knowing now that Mazey was like struggling with her transformation into a werewolf, things make a little bit more sense. It would explain a lot of the things that the paparazzi found in Mazey Day's room at the rehab facility when they were like incessantly snapping their cameras, which is so gross. I also predicted the last scene between a bloody, mangled Mazey Day and Bo in the diner when Mazey Day said, "Shoot me." We all know that it's a double entendre for shooting a gun and shooting a picture. We get it. And last but not least is Demon 79. So in Northern England, 1979, a meek sales assistant is told she must commit terrible acts to prevent disaster. We did get another happy ending in this episode, which I'm not mad about. So we meet Nida, who is living a less than luxurious life in Britain. She's working a thankless job at a shoe department and is dealing with a lot of outward racism from all the individuals around her. She is forced to eat her lunch in the basement when her coworker complains about how her food smells. And this is where she finds a talisman, which of course activates when she accidentally cuts her finger and gets her own blood on it. So after Nida's blood soaks into the talisman, we meet Gob, a demon from hell that informs Nida that she must kill 3 people over the next 3 days in order to prevent the apocalypse. But before any of this happened, we did see a little bit into Nida's murdering tendencies, because she was like daydreaming of hurting all of the really horrible people around her, like slamming her coworker Vicky's head into the glass counter, and then of course strangling that man that murdered his own wife. Gob explains to Nida that she essentially summoned him and is now being tasked to do these murders. He also tells her that he's sort of like a demon in training, and in order for him not to spend the rest of his life in a black void, he has to help her commit these 3 murders. Within this episode is also the radical and the very gross regime of the National Front, which is equivalent of political movements to shut down borders and kicking out anyone that doesn't look like them. And our protagonist, Nida, is unfortunately the center of all this hate. And pushing this disgusting narrative is preliminary candidate Michael Smart, but he is keeping his support of the National Front on the down low. Along with Gop's ability to unleash hell on Earth, he can also see into the future. So with each of Nida's victims, he is able to share the victim's future to basically give Nida some ammo as to why she should kill them, because they're essentially terrible people doing terrible things to other people. So Nida has essentially all of her victims all mapped out, but Nida put a wrench in their plans and wanted to make her last and final victim Michael Smart. So after begging Gop to show Michael Smart's future, we find out that Smart would make his way all the way up to Prime Minister, and he would lead the United Kingdom into this dystopian future. Like real nasty, just horrible future. So Gop tries to convince Nida not to go after Smart, because apparently the devil, Gop's boss, is a big fan of the future that Michael Smart will bring into the United Kingdom. But Nida doesn't care. But then Nida's plan is faltered when the lead police officer, who is on the case of all the other people, the other 2 people that she murdered, actually technically 3 at this point, stops her before she can kill Michael Smart, and he arrests her. So as the clock strikes midnight on the 3rd day, all was quiet, but then we hear the ominous booms of the apocalypse. So having failed on his mission, Gop offers Nida a chance to spend the rest of eternity with him in a black void, and they walk hands in hand into a white light. See? Happy ending. Kind of. I really like this episode. It was a lot different from the other episodes that we saw in this season, which makes sense because it had that red mirror title that I was talking about. And I just loved this friendship between Nita and Gop, like demon and human. This episode was just so well written and the acting was so good. I really wanted to see Nita succeed and take down Michael Smart and like Gop get his gold star in being a demon. But I also like wasn't mad at the ending that we did get. If you think about it, humans as a whole, like we're kind of horrible people. We're selfish, we're rude, we hurt other people, we kill each other, we steal, we cheat, we litter, we pollute, we suck. So thinking of having the apocalypse happen, especially like right now, doesn't sound so bad. Like, just blow it all to smithereens, you know? It's very dark. It's very dark, but it's fine. It's fine. It's good. We're good. What I also enjoyed about this episode was that within like the last 15 minutes left, we were presented with this idea that Nita maybe was going through this like psychotic break. I remember saying out loud when I was watching this episode, I was like, oh my God, is she like hallucinating all of this? And I remembered how there are so many of these infamous murders who have said like, I was doing it because the devil made me do it. I was doing it because I heard voices. I was doing it because I was being told that the apocalypse was gonna come if I didn't kill my entire family. So it's kind of what I thought. But then of course, it really was the apocalypse and it did happen. So there were so many signs within the episode that might have alluded to Nita possibly to maybe have been dreaming. Now just stay with me, okay? Just stay with me. If you made it this far, you can stay with me, all right? She was reading the book and it was called Creative Visualization. Use the power of your imagination to create what you want in life, which maybe a weak argument because technically that's kind of just like a form of manifesting. But the word dream was used a few times throughout the episode as well. Nita would repeat like, am I dreaming? I have to be dreaming. This can't be real. And when Nita stole that red jacket off of the mannequin at the store that she worked at, Gop said, you're dreaming if you think you could pull that off. Once again, it's a little weak, but I thought it was kind of interesting to mention. Once again, the acting was just amazing by the two lead actors. They just embodied their roles as their characters, and the transition in Nita from being this like innocent mouse-like persona to this like badass social justice warrior, like wielding hammers and like running these evil politicians off the road. Also, we can't forget about the witty and charming Gop and his amazing outfit, which was of course inspired by Bobby Farrell from Boney M. So yeah, I just love that episode. So with that all being said, what was my favorite episode from Black Mirror season 6? So this might be a little bit of a shock to you. I don't know if it is. Maybe it's not. But I really enjoyed Loch Henry. I really liked the overall story, the acting, the twist, and the ending as well, which I know I didn't really touch on, and I'm gonna touch on that a little bit now. It didn't have a happy ending, but the ending represented something just so real and like so Black Mirror. We all know that if someone had this kind of footage with this kind of story, the majority of people would essentially sell their soul for fame and fortune. It's like this bittersweet ending as Davis was holding the note that his mother gave him. This small, sleepy Scottish town was full of secrets, and the people who lived in this town did not want these secrets to like get out. It's just also a reminder that the people closest to us might be hiding something, and that eventually they're going to succumb to their evils. If Loch Henry wasn't your favorite, I suggest that you do rewatch with the knowledge of like who Davis's parents are, and you'll pick up on some interesting things that the mom says. And one of them, she said, it was all going great before he broke it all. Interesting. All right, guys, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I appreciate you. My watch time appreciates you as well. Let me know what you thought about Black Mirror season 6 in the comments down below. Let me know your favorite episode, and you can follow, subscribe, like, comment, blah, 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 all that stuff. I'm on social media too if you want to find me over there. But yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.